Hello, Tole Town. I'm so excited to be painting with you again this evening. This is our second class for December 2025 Holiday Hangups event, and we are going to be painting tonight Theodore and Clementine. Cute and fun kind of Victorian snowies for you to paint this evening. And I put in my sneak peek that they're stepping out from Pemberley. So if you are a Pride and Prejudice fan, you will recognize Pemberley as the home of Mr. Darcy. And so I had a little fun. The snowy bodies are painted on book paper, and then they are adhered to a round wooden ornament like this one. I'm going to be actually doing mine on watercolor tonight, but they're created for a 4-inch wooden ornament. Mr. Darcy has a line when he and Elizabeth are discussing poetry, and he says that he had considered poetry to be the food of love. And that's actually a quote from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. So I'm painting on book paper from a book that I have, Tales from Shakespeare. So our first step when we're going to do a project like this where we're painting on some kind of paper is to seal the paper. We don't want to let water saturate the paper, and I often use old book pages, and so especially with old paper, we don't want the water to saturate and break the paper apart and cause us problems. So typically I will use matte medium and seal the paper and then put a coat of gesso on. And so that's what you're going to see me do quickly here. And I think I pulled two pieces of paper, but I can fit both of them on one. So I'm going to just take one of these away. And so I'm using Liquitex Fluid Matte Medium to seal my paper. And we'll also be using the matte medium for loading before we load paint in our brush for floating. So we want to make sure it's fluid matte medium and not like a matte medium gel or something like that. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a light coat. And then I'm going to be using DecoArt Media Line gesso. You can use whatever gesso you want to use. And I'm going to brush a light coat of this on also. And I just want to kind of mute the paper, the text on the paper. I'm not trying to cover it, or it wouldn't really make any sense to paint on paper if we were so opaque that we couldn't see the print. But I don't want it to be really dark. I want to see the painted piece more than the text. So I'm just putting a kind of a sheer coat. Okay. So that's going to be our first step. And then I'm actually going to come back in with the matte medium, and I'm going to make sure that I have my page borders sealed also, because I'm going to be using this section of the page for their hats and scarves. Of course, you are completely welcome to just base coat your ornaments and then paint these as usual. You don't have to make a collage project out of them. I love collage. I love book paper. I love the significance of this book paper, and so I'm just having fun, a little mixed media fun with these, but you can paint them just as you normally would. I think I'm going to kind of just lay them up here so they're slightly in view while we work. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and transfer them on to my page, just like we always do when we paint. I'm going to slide my transfer paper under, grab my stylus, and just the bodies, because the hats and scarves are going to be a separate piece of paper. And I'm going to peek under here and make sure it transferred. Okay, it did. Sometimes on the matte medium, it doesn't want to transfer as easily as we're used to. So if that's the case, you can put something really firm underneath your paper. Like I often use an acrylic. I'll show you. I often use a little piece of acrylic. I got this at Dollar Tree in the craft section at one time. Also, if you happen to have a Cuttlebug, they come with acrylic plates that go through the machine for the embossing, and so I often use those. I'm just going to move this around a little bit to see where I want. I can see gift down there. That's kind of nice. I'm just looking at the words that are showing in his body, because we will see some of that when it's finished. And I actually thought that I had pulled a page from 12th Night. And then as I was starting to record, I realized that this was the page from the previous story in the book. There's maybe 10 stories in this particular book that I have, but we're going to just still go with it. Okay, so I have my gesso on. I've got my pattern transferred. What I want to do is tint the paper now with buttermilk, because they're going to have some white dry brushing for highlighting, and we want that to show up. So instead of starting right out with white so that I'm already bright, I want to just tone down the color a little bit with an off-white, and so I'm choosing buttermilk for this. So I'm just going to pick up a little bit of matte medium in my brush, and then I'm just going to go right over the whole thing. So I could have tinted my whole page with buttermilk after the gesso, but I'm just going to go in like this and tint the portion of the paper that they're on. And again, the matte medium in the brush gives our paint some transparency. So again, I can still see that the text of my book paper through. Then I'm going to tint the left and right edges of their bodies with crystal blue, just to give them kind of an icy look. So anytime I'm floating, when I'm painting on the paper, I'm picking up matte medium in my brush for the float. Okay, so I've got my matte medium in a little cup here, and I'm just going to pick a little bit up. I'm going to blend it in to my brush, pick up the color on the toe, just as we always do when we're floating, and I'm going to blend this out really well on my palette so that it's very transparent and sheer on the palette, and that way I know when I come to my snowman body, it's going to be nice and transparent on him. And I'm walking this color in a little bit. It's very, very sheer, very transparent, because we don't want him to be blue, but we're just giving a little hint of that blue. I'm sure you've all seen snow on a sunny day, and you have all those sparkling, crystally reflections coming at you, and you can see that blue, hint of blue in the snow. It's so pretty. We have lots of snow right now here where I live. I'm in northern New York, and we're way up in the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains, and we're getting really a beautiful snowy December. The last 2 Christmas seasons, we have not had very much snow. Actually, I can't remember if it was last year or the year before. We had a very snowy November, and then we had a lot of rain in December, and we lost our snow, and we had a green Christmas, which was so sad to me. I really, really dislike a green Christmas. And then the day after Christmas, we got a really big snowstorm. So we had snow in the window of Christmas, but unfortunately not on Christmas Day. Okay, so here's our tint of blue, very light, very delicate. And now I'm going to float white down the left and the right sides and give a dry brush to the center of their bodies. I'm actually going to do that, the reverse of what I just said. I'm going to give a dry brush and then I'm going to float. So I'm using a kind of a large dry brush. I'm just going to pick that color up in my brush. And then I'm going to scrub it off on a paper towel so that I have just a haze of color left in my brush. And this is what's going to go on my snowman. I'm going to zoom in here for you. And this is going to go in the center of the belly and in the center of the face. Okay. It's a little difficult for white sometimes to show up on my camera. I hope you can see this. But just think about the fact that snowmen are big and round. And so we want to have that nice round belly and the face. So these are snowballs, right, that are piled on top of one another. Three large snowballs that make up the snowman. And so to make a ball, we want the center that's closest to us to be bright, and then we're going to have that shading on the side edges to push them away. And these are just little whimsical snowmen, so we're not going to have this blue that we put on is basically our shading, but we still need the white to pull things forward. And then we are going to push a little bit of white down the edges just so we can get that snowy look. Okay, so this is going to be a sheer float of white because I want the blue to still show through, and I'm not going to go, that's why we walked the blue in so that we would have that coming way in. And so this white does not cover all of the blue, and the blue still peeks through the white thanks to the wonder of our matte medium. Okay, so you can see that our blue still shows through. And then I'm going to do the other side, and again, very narrow. I'm not covering up what we had previously floated blue. I'm just getting a little touch of a white edge, a little snowy edge for them. It shows up really well on this one. And you can see some blue here outside of the lines because we're going to cut these out and then collage them on. I'm not careful in the least about my outer edges. I use the paper to my advantage in the fact that we're going to cut it out, and I'll often float right over the line to help me get a nice smooth and soft float. You can't get away with that when we're painting on a plaque and the design is actually transferred on the plaque. We have to be really careful, but with the paper we have all that extra grace. Okay, now we're going to go to coral blush and a frosty tummy. So I'm again going to be dry brushing. I'm moving to a little bit smaller dry brush this time. Work this in, and then I'm going to be extra careful here when I'm scrubbing off because I don't want to have a lot of moisture. So I'm getting off all that excess paint, and I'm going to come across the tummy. I'm going to start out with a very, very light pressure. I call it a tickle pressure, okay? Barely touching the surface, and you can see all the pink that I'm getting off here. So I don't want to add any more pressure than this. I want the color to be nice and soft. If I come over here outside of the design and I put a lot of pressure down, okay, see how thick this is, and I can see kind of some brush lines through. I don't want to have something like that happening. So I'm just going to stay light. And as the paint starts to come off, you'll find you've got to increase your pressure. And so just barely increase your pressure. And that's exactly perfect. And then we're going to do this on their cheeks. So just touching down a little bit on the right and the left. on both little faces. Boy, it doesn't look like much yet, but it will. And then I'm going to clean out my dry brush with a little bit of hand sanitizer rather than rinsing it in my water, because the alcohol in the hand sanitizer evaporates out super fast, and that way I can continue to use my dry brush. And I will want to use this one again because I want to dry brush my hat and my scarf. So I'm just using the hand sanitizer to clean out the paint, then pinching the brush and drying it out in my paper towel, and it will be ready to use again in just a few moments. Okay, now we're going to come back with our line drawings, and we're going to transfer the face. Just going to give myself the little indication of where the eyes, nose, smile. I don't need all those dots on there. I just need a place to start. And then Clementine, Theodore and Clementine, lovely Victorian names. Same thing with her face. Get myself started there. And then I'm going to also go ahead and transfer my scarf in the page border while I have my transfer paper out here. For their noses, we're going to use Canyon Orange. And these little guys, you could add extra shading, extra highlighting. These were created with the thought in mind that we are 10 days before Christmas. And so I just wanted to keep them quick and easy for you to do. Not just as ornaments for the tree, but again, you could use them for package tags, whatever you like. I did put a little bit of shading at the base of the nose, and we're going to be using raw sienna for their little stick arms. And so with my brush still loaded in the Canyon Orange, I did pick up a tiny bit of raw sienna and just stroke that at the base and just blend it right out into the nose. I'm not floating it. My Canyon Orange is still wet, so it's just kind of a dirty brush blend. And I'm just softly bringing it out into that Canyon Orange and along the bottom edge of the carrot. Okay, that's all the extent of that. And then their eyes and their smile are just little dip dots of black. So I'm going to, that as you dot things, the dotting is going to get smaller and smaller as you go. So I'm going to put one eye and then the small eye second. And the same thing on their smiles. I'm going to start with the largest stone and then work my way down without dotting again. So my little stones get smaller and smaller. Okay, so the cute little smile, little half smile kind of. And then Clementine. One eye, two eye. And then her little smile stones. So his hat band is done in the pink to rose blend, and then her scarf is, and then his scarf is going to be aloe and evergreen, and then we'll repeat that for her hat. So they're kind of a little reverse of one another. So let's go ahead with the aloe first, since I have his scarf down here. normally I would be erasing all of these lines down so they're just barely, barely visible. But I think when I do a video, it's a little harder for you without the lines on there to be able to follow. So I'm not erasing mine for the video, but I always encourage you to erase your transfer lines as much as you can and still see where you're working. Okay, so we just need one little drop of aloe. And that's the great thing when we paint on paper like this. It takes very little paint because, again, that matte medium is thinning things out for us, and we get a lot of mileage from our paint that way. And the base coat, just like their bodies, I'm not going to stay in the lines. Just going to brush blend this in, and then his scarf, I'm just going to come right down here and tint it. And actually, you know what? I wanted to do a brush blend of aloe and white. I wanted to do a little very light tint now that I just did that. So let me redo this. I'm going to pick up some white in my brush. I got a little carried away there. I'm going to lighten up his scarf and then her hat. Okay, very pale, pale green. And then let's look at Theodore's top hat. Okay, again, coming into my matte medium. And then I'm just going to pick up lamp black on a little small angular brush. And we're not going to float over the hat band because that's going to be that nice pinky rose color. So I don't want to have to try to cover that with black. So we're going to first come just down the edge. We're going to stop when we hit the hat band. And I'm going to walk this color towards the center. Just being careful at my hat band. I'm going to turn over and do the same thing on the other side. Walking into the center, staying away from my hat band. So at this point, the center of the hat is quite bright. I'm just floating kind of like a C stroke around one side, and then I'm going to flip my brush and do a C stroke here, and then I'm just going to walk that color floating underneath the hat band. And you can see how scratchy my paint got right here. So if that happens, just go back to your matte medium, refresh it so that you get that flow back to your brush. And there's the brim. Okay. And then coming back to the aloe scarf and hat. Now I'm going to switch to evergreen. I'm just putting one little drop again out on my palette, dipping my brush again into the matte medium, bring the toe of my angular brush into the paint, and just blend, 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 blend until the color is nicely transparent. So I love my gray palette because as I blend my paint out, when I start to see the gray palette kind of glowing from beneath, I know my paint is nicely transparent. That's the look I'm after. If it's still thick and opaque on my palette, then it's going to be thick and opaque on my project. Okay, so we're going to just be tinting the left and the right sides. And again, I'm not trying to be a broken record about the fact that we don't have to stay in the lines, but it's what makes this so wonderful. So I'm just going to bring my float at the edge and start walking it in towards the center. Just that's it. Then I'm going to grab my mop brush and I'm going to mop it lightly and let that carry the color. When you mop, right away you get that little the impression from your mop brush, which I love when I'm doing scarves and hats because it gives us a really soft fuzzy texture. I like to do it on the snowmen themselves too, actually. Use that to your advantage sometimes. Okay, so I'm just going to be flipping again. Okay, same thing on the other side. Just float the edge and then stroke over it several times to start bringing your color in toward the center. And I'm going to mop it again. And then we'll repeat that to just strengthen the outer color a bit so we get a nice turn where the scarf is going around the body. We'll get some nice depth there. Okay, so this whole thing I'm going to repeat now for her hat. So I'm reloading in matte medium, reblending my brush out, and now we're going to come over here to her hat. I'm going to start up at the top and bring the evergreen down. And I'm not going to go over all of my roses because, again, I don't want to have to fight that extra color. So I'm just lifting my brush up when I meet the roses and continue walking the hat band. And I'm going to turn upside down. Now on this side, I don't have any roses to avoid, so I can just do the whole left side of the hat. I'm treating the hat band separately from the top. So bring that across and float it up and then come to the hat and walk it in. We just want that nice subtle little tint. And let me show you the finished one again so you can see it's just a little gentle tint on there. And the scarf, same thing. And let me see if this is dry enough to repeat. I think I'm going to give this a little dry with my dryer. And then I'm going to repeat those green floats one more time, just strengthen them up a wee little bit. There we go, a little bit darker. And then I like to just go right over the whole scarf and get those extra impressions. That's totally up to you, but I see how soft and fuzzy that looks. I just love getting that extra texture there. So that's just the residue that's on the bristle coming off into that lighter area. Okay, there's that. And I'm going to dry brush now up the center of the hat. Before I can put this other shading on the hat, I really need to get this dry brushing in the middle. So we're going to go ahead and just dry brush down the center of the upper part of the top hat, keeping it nice and soft. And I am walking it out a little bit, which is going to be, some of this will be covered up with our next float, but the dry brushing comes through like a nice glow from below. Again, kind of thanks to that matte medium. To me, it's the magic. I love it so much. Okay. So just repeating that shading that we did on the edges, and again, walking it in. And see how soft that looks now? And once we get the other side on, you'll see that highlight just comes through the sheer black now that's laying on top of it, and it makes it just so soft. Just gonna blend out this one again. And there we have the hat with a nice soft shimmery highlight down the center. So let's go ahead and base coat now her scarf and then his hat band. This will be ready to work with by then. And this is going to start out with a cotton candy base coat, and we're going to just touch a little touch of country red into that. And then we'll be shading with country red. So I'm going to put out a drop of cotton candy. and just a drop of country red. And I'm just going to grab a little round brush to do my mixing. I'm just going to come into my country red and grab just a little bit on the tip of that brush and then stir into the cotton candy so you can see I'm just tinting that pink just a little bit. And that's really just to marry the colors. I just talked about this in a class that I taught a couple of nights ago. When we're using different colors like this, we can tone the palette just by introducing a little bit of one shade into another shade. So we just want to push that cotton candy so that it plays nicely with our red, and we do that by adding a little of it. Okay, so we don't want that. If you have a little chisel blender, that works wonderfully for base coating the hat band, but I'm just going to use a little number 4 flat. We want the color again to be nice and soft and sheer. My camera come back into focus. So first I'm going to pick up matte medium on my brush, and I do wet the brush in my rinse water, but I completely blot it out. So my bristles are not dry and stiff, but they're not wet. So come into my matte medium and then pull out from that cotton candy. And we'll just stroke over the hat band. Again, those outer edges don't matter because we're going to cut this out. And the same thing with the scarf. I'm just going to come right over this whole thing and just tint the paper. The line drawing shows through, so we're still going to know where we're headed and we'll know where to cut this out. But it makes it so much faster. And that's what we're all about tonight, doing this project quickly so that if you're going to do multiples, you can just kind of assembly line this, just like we talked about the other night with the little angels. So if you're painting a lot of these, you could have your hats all lined up, your scarves all lined up. Okay, so now I'm going to reload in my cotton candy just on the toe. This is the cotton candy mix just on the toe, and I'm going to just pick up a little tiny bit of country red on that toe and blend that in. Such a pretty color. And we're going to pull down those left and right sides and softly bring that in towards the center. Not all the way in, just walk it in until you start to run out of color. But we want to keep a very nice light center, and it's going to fade into what we just blended, and then we'll have country red now going on to be our actual side shadows to push it back. But isn't that pretty? Okay, now for our scarf, guess we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to, again, just reload in matte medium, pick up a little bit of the light mix, pick up a little bit of country red, blend, blend, blend. And I want to go make sure I'm in your view here, because this one has got some overlaps that we need to be mindful of. So let's do the outer edges first. So I'm just going to float down this left edge, and that's all I'm going to do because I have the scarf tail here, so I don't want to walk my float in there. On the opposite side though, I'm going to float my edge and I'm going to walk toward the middle. Okay. And then because we have the scarf now overlapping, this is the part that comes around her neck, we want to have a shadow here that's cast down from that tail. So we want a little float there. And I'm just going to rinse and soften this out a little bit so it's not quite so harsh. And this long tail is going to throw a shadow down on top of this tail. Also, this tail is underneath the part that's wrapped around her neck, okay? So this little shadow that I just floated here, we actually are going to extend that all the way down and then underneath this little corner. Then we need to let that dry, but we'll also put a shadow at the top that's being cast down from the scarf. And then this tail will actually also get a shadow because it's getting tucked under. And so we're going to have a shadow up there. We have shadows that are giving us creating shape and shadows that are creating depth. So we're doing both of these right now. Okay, so still on this little pink scarf, I'm going to come down the edge and just under this corner. Okay, so this is the shadow that's caused by this tail. I just love these pink colors. And then we're going to run a little shadow along the top edge of that tail. So same color. So we're going to come right along this top edge, pushing up to create our shape, which we can also, we'll have some help with that when we cut out the paper. Our scissor work is really nice for creating shape also. Okay, but this darkness is because of the tail is tucking around that edge. All right, and then let's come back to the green. I realized that I missed one little shadow on that hat where we want a shadow along the base of the hat where the hat brim sits on top of it. So I'm just going to do that one real quick. This is still back to the evergreen. And that's going to float right here. And if you want to bring it all the way over to keep it soft, it can come behind the roses. That's fine. And then our hat brim will pop. Okay, so then we're going to come back to our dry brush with white. And let's get the dry brush highlighting on all of these pieces. So once again, just picking that color up in the brush. Press and lift, press and lift, press and lift. And then I'm making sure I have a nice dry area of my paper towel to offload the brush so I don't introduce any moisture here. And you can see that color go from very dark to just like a little haze, and that's what I'm after. I really want just that little light haze of color. Okay, so let's come down to his scarf first. This highlight's going to come right down the center. And you can come up and down, you can go left to right, whatever's more comfortable for you. It's going to be brighter in the middle and then lighter at the edges. And so see how mine, I just got this big blob right here. So I want to show you two things. I'm going to tell you two things about that. First of all, one of the great things about working with matte medium is that it seals the paper. And so look at this. I'm going to stroke over that with a damp brush. And I'm going to take that paint right off. Okay, because the matte medium that we're using for our floating creates a nice sealed layer, and it seals in each layer as we go. So I could wipe that right off without even having a worry. Why did that happen? Because in my brush, I did not have my paint scrubbed out enough, for one thing. I also may have a little moisture in here, but the other thing is, remember that tickle pressure we talked about in the beginning? So I did not approach this with the same light hand, and I ended up getting a big blob out. Now I can see that right here, actually, where there's a lot of thickness, right? Can you see that above my fingernail? So I've got a lot of paint still in there. Okay, so now I'm going to come at this again, just using that tickle pressure. And now look how soft. What a difference. So just use a light pressure. Ideally, as you put this on, you're going to be putting a lot of pressure down, and that's what keeps it really soft like this. But you just don't want to do it right away because you don't want to end up like I just did with a blob. Okay, then we want to have a nice little highlight in the center of the pink hat band. And then her hat band. Just, we want that nice glow. So pretty. So pretty. And then on the pink, right in the center again in the fullness because it's going around the neck and they're chubby little snow people. So this is going to be coming out far from the body. And then guess what? On her, the tail, I'm going to come down the length of this upper tail. Get a little brightness on that also. And now the last step on these bands, and we'll be good here. So I'm going to come back to my little angular brush. I still have the country red on my palette. And I'm using two different angular brushes tonight. I have a 3/8 angular brush and I have this little 1/4 inch, and I'm kind of working between them. Okay, so now I want the country red at the very outer edges and just softly pulling it in just a wee little bit so that it blends into the pink and the pink mix. And we have a nice dark outer edge and a softly rose inner band. And so the same thing on the pink scarf. We want to keep it that nice rose color. And we're going to use the country red to just give us our dark darks. So I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to do a little narrow float down the left side, just that little bit. And then I'm going to come down my right side a little, walk it in just maybe a 1/4 inch or so, maybe a 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to repeat this shadow. Sorry, I'm really losing my center here. This happens to me anytime I move my overhead camera and I reposition my chair, then I'm lost for a little while. I must subconsciously have a certain place I sit at my desk. Okay, so now this deep shadow is going to follow. This is more narrow so that I don't lose the rosy one that we just did. This is just tight against the edges. And I'm going to do very sheer just at the tippy top of the curve there. Okay. And then remember I mentioned that we have this part of the scarf falling on top of this tail. So we do want to still put a little bit of dark there. So now I'm going to float the top of this underside, this bottom tail, the top edge underneath that neck area of this, under the neck area of the scarf. And then to finish it up, we're going to have a little sheer highlight of white. So I'm going to load with matte medium, pick up just a tiny bit of white. And first of all, on the pink, we want this along those the bottom of the tails. And especially the big tail, I'm going to walk this up a bit. I'm going to walk it up even a little more. So let me just reload here. I'm going to pull this up a little more. Okay, and on the hat, I want to get a highlight right here in the center of the brim. And again, we're going to paint roses there, so I can start in the roses. But I don't want this white to go all the way over to where we shaded. So I'm going to just slide that up towards the middle because I just need that little bit of highlight right there. And I'm going to zoom back out I'm going to grab my detail scissors and I'm going to cut all of this out. The rest of the details we're going to do once they're collaged on. So we're going to just cut all of these guys out. Okay, so your surface, if you're doing these as ornaments, is the 4-inch rounds. If you're doing them as package tags, you could also use those 4-inch ornaments, or you may decide to use watercolor paper, which that's what I did. So our either way, the backgrounds are base coated with crystal blue plus white. It's a 1-to-1 mix, okay? So we're going to put these guys on one at a time. And when you position them, you're going to let the paper come off your edge just a little bit so that you can trim that up afterwards, okay? And if you're doing it on the wooden ornaments, you'll sand it off, and I'll show you how to do that. If you're doing it on the paper, then we'll just trim it, but we want to position them so that it's off just a wee little bit. And we're going to just put the pieces on first before we collage things down. So that we can just see if anything needs to be trimmed up, because sometimes as we paint, things change. So I can see that my scarf is a little shorter than what I have on my body. But remember, I painted outside the lines. Just a little trim so that everything fits. This side looks really good. Just getting my edges lined up. Okay, so everything looks good for this. And then his hat's going to fit right on, so he's good. I'll set that one aside. And let me bring her scarf over. And oh, that's perfect. And then her little hat, that's good. Okay, so we're good here. So I'm going to get out some more matte medium in my little cup. So we're going to take our matte medium and we're going to paint the back of the paper and the ornament where she's going to be placed. Okay, so I'm going to do the back of the paper. I'm going to do a good share of the ornament. So I have two wet surfaces coming together. I'm going to position her on, and what am I being watchful for is the bottom of the ornament, because I want her body to be even or falling off slightly the bottom of the ornament. And then also, if you're doing the ornament and you have the hole cut out, you want to make sure that she's centered underneath the hole. Okay, so I'm just brushing underneath the paper to make sure I have matte medium everywhere underneath there. And then I'm going to gently brush her into position. And then I'm going to get a little bit of matte medium on my fingertip, and I'm going to just very carefully glide over her. I'm using a firm but gentle pressure because I want to get any air that's trapped under the paper out of there and excess medium out of there. And then just brush over it with your paintbrush to remove the excess. And we're just going to keep on going, okay? I'm going to go ahead and put now matte medium on the back of her scarf and where her body is, on the neck. And before I press down, I want to make sure I've got my position, because once these make contact, they don't want to come up and we don't want to tear our paper. So again, I'm going to make sure I've got matte medium below her scarf, and I'm going to brush this into position. And same thing, I'm just going to give a little gentle rub here. And finally, her hat. And same thing, I'm not going to press down yet until I have the position I want. And then just brush it into place. Squeegee it out. and smooth everything off. And at this point, I'm just brushing over my whole surface with this nice light motion, smoothing everything out. And then guess what? I'm sealing this whole thing. The matte medium is sealing the edges of the paper. It's giving you a nice coat over the entire surface. Okay, so let's set her aside and we'll get Theodore down. So same thing, you're gonna, if you have an ornament with a hole, you're gonna make sure that you have him centered underneath your hole so you don't have any sad surprises at the end. Because I'm doing this as a tag, I can put my hole in afterwards and I don't have to worry about that, but make sure you're watchful. Okay, so I'm watching my bottom edge again to make sure my paper is right down there. And I don't want to have any of the ornaments showing below him. I want him to be the bottom. Okay, brush over and then squeegee him out. And if your fingertip, it drags on the paper, just add, you'll see me kind of brush some medium right on my fingertip. And that way you can glide right over it like this. Okay, and then scarf. And in your supply list, it says baby wipes, and this is why, because this is going to be a little sticky on the fingertips. So we just use baby wipes and clean our fingers off. Okay, smooth it out. And I can tell I'm starting to dry, so I'm smoothing my whole surface right now before I do the hat. Because I don't want to be creating a mess on here either, and it dries very, very quickly. So I'm just going to give that a second. And on my original, my hat was a little taller, so I shorted my hat this time when I painted them. Isn't that funny how things change? My original Theodore, my hat went all the way up to the top edge, which I really do like. So I gave him a little shorter hat this time somehow. Okay, now make sure you clean out your brush that you just used your matte medium in, because that matte medium, as much as we love it, it can be hard on your brushes. So rinse them out right away. And then this is a case where after your painting session, if you are somebody who does a rinse and then does not really wash your brushes out right away, you're not going to want to do that with these. You're going to want to really give them a good clean. Okay, so here's where we started. Here's where we are. You can see we've got some details to add. If you want to put a little shadow around them to separate them kind of from the background a little more, that's totally up to you. I've said several different times that the whole purpose of this is to create something that's quick and easy for you to do right before the holidays. So if you need to be quick, then this is good. If you want to put a little shadow behind them, we did crystal and white for our base coat, so you could just use crystal blue and run a little of that behind them. What I liked was a little mix of Bahama and crystal. So let me show you what that looks like. Just a little subtle to separate them from the background. Okay, that step is completely optional. So Clementine has these cute little roses on her hat. For the roses, we're going to put one little drop of cotton candy on our palette, a drop of country red, and we're just going to give ourselves light, medium, and darker colors. for her little roses. So I'm going to put a cotton candy puddle, just a little, just a drop, not really a puddle. Country red. I'm going to scoop out, and do a 1-to-1 mix. And then I'm going to take what's on my brush here and just get my cotton candy a wee little bit darker. And I'm going to put just a touch of this into the country red to make it more rosy. So now my colors are all intermixed, and see what a pretty combination they are. And so this is what we have. Our big flower is the medium color, the tiny flower is the dark, and then the lower flower is the light, okay? So I'm just using my round brush. The only place we need to be really careful is the edge of our paper here. Okay, base coat one in. Round that out a little more. Then go to my dark mix, and that's going to be the little guy up here. And part of it is covered over by the big flower. And then another quick rinse, and then the light pink. And of course, you can do these in different orders. You could use different colors. You can do whatever you want. Okay, so to turn these into roses, it's really simple. I'm going to just get my country red out again. I'm going to pick it up on this little round brush. And I'm just going to, let me see if I can zoom in here. We're just going to put some swirls. Okay, so I'm going to go around, and they're wiggly. A little swirl. And see how I'm just continuing to brush mix, right? So I've got to go to my light pink, and I'm actually running out of paint. So let me get a little more cotton candy out. And I'm just going to take my dirty brush into the cotton candy, swirl in this one. I need to get a little darker. Swirl through. And then I'm going to go into that darker and get my center dark. Okay, get my center dark, get my center dark. Now everything is just being blended, brush, puddle to puddle. Now I need some highlights. So I'm going to go in between the swirls. And then I'm going to use white as my final highlight. That's it. Going to swirl dark, going to swirl your light color, and then you're going to add just here and there a little bit of white. So let me just touch a little white on my palette. Okay, and I'm not going to make this one solid because I just want a few little indications of high petals. So I'm just going to touch here and there. And there's her cute little roses. Then we need evergreen for the greenery. Okay, so for the little leaves, I'm just going to pick up my little round brush. And so it's just press, lift, press, lift, and just tuck some little leaves in there. Okay. And then for the, if we want to make, let's do another little leafy guy down here. And then I'm going to thin my paint down just a little bit more. And let's make a little, what looks like an evergreen sprig. So this time I'm pulling away from the stem instead of setting the tip down to get a nice thick leaf. I'm just pulling out, out, out. Okay. And then she's going to get some little berries too, but let's get his little leaves on. I didn't paint evergreen on his hat, just the little leafy sprigs. And these are all just kind of tucked into his hat band. So I've got one here. I have one kind of curving off. And then back into that country red, and we're going to let our country red be the berries. And I'm just going to continue with my round, this little round brush, and dot some little berries wherever you need them for fillers. Okay, so he's got lots of greenery on his hat. And let's give her some little berries also. Okay, so now we're going to put on some snowflakes, but first, see how the edges have this icy frostiness? And so we're going to go back to our gesso. This is so fun. How are your hands looking? Oh, I could back out of here. How are your hands looking? Mine are looking really great. Okay, so I'm going to just touch my finger into my gesso. I'm going to come to the edge of the paper and I'm going to get excess off. And then I'm just going to drag it back on here and there. And some of this is going to go right over the snowman's body, the snow lady's body. You could do this with white paint instead of the gesso if you want to. I love doing this. It's like the snow is blowing and drifting on. Okay. And I'm going to give Theodore some. I like to let some of it, there we go, cross over other pieces, other parts of the design, so it looks like it's wisping right over everything. Okay, now he has a little bit of snowy goodness. The snowflakes are white. in a liner brush, or if you've got a little small round you've been using, you could continue with that. Okay, so our snowflakes are going to be a line and then an X. So we're going to make a little thin line down. Hopefully you can see that. And then I'm going to make an X over that. Okay. And that's going to give us our 6. And then we're going to just dot the outside of each line. And there we have a little snowflake. So I'm going to do those here and there. Dot, 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 dot. I'm going to let one of them come up here on his hat. And don't forget Clementine. Then I put a few little lines at the end of Clementine's scarf. 2 little stripes, white. If you want to, you could add some fringe coming down from the scarf. This is where it starts to go from. These are going to be quick to you could start getting into more and more and more. Because when you start adding the fringe, then you could add a light layer on top and make it look thicker. So now I'm just picking up white and I'm restroking some of these lines. You can get into adding some darks and making it thicker yet. You could add some little dots, like knots that the fringe is, where the fringe is tied off onto the scarf. That's super cute. On the top of the hat, you could come in and thin down a little evergreen and give Clementine's hat a few little stripes downward so that it looks like the grooves in the knitting. So if you do that, just follow the curve of the hat. Very light, but adds so much, right? On Theodore's scarf, you could add some stripes or maybe make him a plaid, which is what I did on the pattern. So maybe red. And if it's going to be a plaid or the suggestion of a plaid, maybe we'll pull just a little bit of broken horizontal lines. And then to turn it into a plaid, either white or pink. And they need their little arms, raw sienna. I'm just going to press and lift, 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 lift. So they're nice and skinny little sticks at the end. This is the same for both little snowies. Let's give another stick, another little twig. And then the last thing that I did was add white to the bottom so it looks like snow, which you could do this with white paint. Just don't thin your paint down, and just, I'm using a filbert brush here, and just drag your edge and then push up so you get some little snowdrift type shapes. The filbert's nice because it's so round. Okay, so you could do something like this all around your edge, as high up as you want to go. Or you could add some texture paste or some snow text and give them actual snow. You could dab. So my original top hat, remember I said to you my top hat was all the way up to the top edge originally. And then when I painted this one tonight, I managed to somehow get a shorter hat. So I could come up here and give him a pile of snow on the top of his hat maybe. Just by dragging that down and pressing, let it kind of come down over the top of his hat a bit. You could give them a little snow on their noses if you want to. And then I had some tiny little buttons, and I used tacky glue and put the buttons on. And if you want to be extra, you could tie some thread in these first before you tacky glue them on. But how cute is that? So a little tacky glue. I'm not going to glue these yet because I think I am going to tie threads. And then the final step, if you want to, is to spatter the whole thing with white so they have some all over snow. So if you do that, then maybe a fan brush works so nice for spattering, or maybe you have a spatter tool that you want to use. The fan brush, just thin it down and then just tap and make it snow. And now, oh, I have the goodness. I can always tell when I've had a great time in my paint area depending on what my hands look like. Okay, so if you've done this on watercolor paper like I have, then go ahead and just punch a hole, and you can thread through some baker's twine or some jute or some ribbon depending on the look. Maybe ribbon, since we've given these kind of more Victorian look, would be pretty. Oh, some velvet ribbon might be pretty. Okay, and then here are my originals to compare. See, I didn't have the fringe on hers, and I love the fringe on this one. So anyway, Clementine and Theodore, I hope you enjoyed painting them. I hope you enjoyed our time in this December of the holiday hang-ups and all the goodies that the design team put together for you. Um, and just know that we love and appreciate all of you, and we wish you the very merriest of Christmases. Thanks, guys. Paint with you again soon. Bye.